I'm going to talk about the recent overview of the recent changes that the government have pledged to protect renters and what this means and why the coalition was set up. Back in 2017, renters organisations came together to launch a campaign called the End Unfair Evictions campaign, which called on the government to ban Section 21 no-fault evictions. Section 21 no-fault evictions mean that landlords can evict tenants without giving a reason, as I'm sure many of you will know, and it's likely some of you may have experienced this yourself. Section 21 evictions are incredibly damaging to renters in lots of different ways. They are a leading cause of homelessness, and they stop us as renters from having stable and secure homes and putting down roots and having, just basic right of a secure home. So in, as I say, a few years ago in 2017, rental organisations came together to demand change. The campaign was made up of Generation Rent, London Renters Union, Acorn, the New Economics Foundation, Renters' Rights London, and was backed by people from across the housing world and from different political parties too. The campaign put pressure on the government, and the government pledged to end Section 21. And this only happened because of the pressure that the campaign built to demand change. Renters Together made headlines, got over 50,000 people to sign a petition, took a protest out to Parliament, which is what you can see in the photo there, and really built that public support. So in April 2019, the government promised that they would end Section 21 no-fault evictions, and it was a huge moment for everyone involved in the campaign, and we really saw it as a win and celebrated. But as many of you will know, over 2 years later, the government's still not delivered on their promise, and it's been really, really damaging throughout the pandemic to see that no-fault evictions are still in place. Throughout the pandemic, even when evictions were banned, Section 21 notices were dropping on renters' doors. Generation Rent has estimated that nearly 700,000 renters will have received a Section 21 notice in the last year in the pandemic. So we really need to make sure that this pledge is delivered on and that Section 21 evictions are banned. And so while the government hasn't actually put forward legislation to end Section 21 yet, a lot of things have happened in the 2 and a bit years since April 2019, and I just want to sort of run over a few of them and run over the recent changes to give everyone an overview of where we are. So the government announced in 2019, and then in the general election again in 2019, and then again in 2021, they announced that they are committed to ending unfair evictions. And they are committed to making things fairer for renters. They're calling it delivering a better deal for renters. So while the changes haven't been made yet, the government has stressed again and again that they are still due to be delivered, which is a good thing. So the government has announced recently that they will publish their plans to make renting fairer in a white paper, which is effectively a large paper that will set out their intention for reform. And this paper is due in the autumn, so in the next 3 months. And we don't know exactly what's going to be in the paper yet, but so far we know that the government are looking to end Section 21 no-fault evictions and create a fairer system with more secure tenancies after Section 21 is gone. We also know that they're looking at improving standards and making it harder for criminal landlords who let out unsafe properties to get away with it, and to make it easier for councils to bring those landlords to justice and to hold them to account. One of the ways they are looking at doing this is through examining whether a national register of landlords would work. And the final thing that they have pledged to do is make deposits fairer, so that hopefully, you know, as I'm sure you know, when you move house, there's a huge upfront cost involved in moving, because renters have to get a new deposit before the old one is back. So yeah, so while the reforms haven't been brought in yet, it's a really, really important opportunity to push for the changes that, you know, as renters, we all need to see. And the reason why I've gone through this context is because this is the context in which the Renters Reform Coalition was set up. It was set up to capitalise on this really important opportunity to make renting fairer. And I'm going to hand over to Siobhan now, who's going to talk a bit more about who the coalition are, why we launched, and what we want to see.
Hi everyone. I think if you can go on to the next slide. Yeah, fantastic. So hi, my name's Siobhan. So basically the Renters Reform Coalition came together in around November last year, and it's made up of 20 leading housing organisations from across the sector. So it's quite a broad kind of membership, which includes some of the larger kind of charities, frontline advice services, renters unions, campaign organisations. So it's quite representative of the kind of like wider kind of like housing movement of people kind of committed to reforming the private rented sector, and all of the organisations involved are kind of united in their mission to reform private rented housing, to ensure that basically anyone who relies on private rented kind of housing as a home can live happy, healthy lives. So there's a huge amount of expertise in the coalition, drawing from their kind of frontline conservative vision, policy, research, campaigning, and also mobilisation of renters. And the coalition together is kind of a testament to the kind of scale of the crisis within the private rented sector, which was present before the pandemic and was kind of revealed, kind of like shone a massive light on during the pandemic as well, because of the kind of issues of like rent arrears, like higher level of evictions, kind of like what Caitlin was touching on. So basically, everyone in the coalition kind of sees the Renters Reform Bill and the promises made by the Conservative government as a massive opportunity that can't be missed, because there's not been kind of reforms of the scale for quite a few decades now. So all of the organisations came together to basically influence the Renters Reform Bill and make sure that that those who are going to be most affected by these reforms, which is essentially renters, are going to be represented, and their voice is going to be kind of like heard and pushed for through the reforms. So I think if you can go on to the next slide. Yeah, so the coalition has basically collectivised kind of all their priorities for the reforms ahead for the private rented sector. And we've come together to kind of put together what we're calling policy principles, which are basically our ask for the Renters Reform Bill, what we want to see represented in the changes that are coming up. So it kind of fits into three main categories of like what our priorities are for the coalition. So we're looking at stability and affordability, because we believe that renters have the right to stable homes that they can call their own, where they can put down roots in their communities, free from the worry of constant kind of upheaval and the cost of unexpected house moves, and rent that they can actually afford. And then secondly, we want to see safe and decent homes, because we believe that renters have the right to live in good health in a safe home, free of serious hazards and disrepair. And we're also committed to seeing a just housing system. So we want to see a private rental system which is free of all forms of discrimination, and that really addresses the power imbalance between landlords and renters. So I can kind of go into a little bit more detail about kind of the specifics of what we're asking for as well, and later on people can ask some questions around this as well. But if you can go on to the next slide, please. Yeah, so what we're committed for in looking at stability and affordability under the reforms ahead is basically seeing that like no fault evictions or Section 21 is actually delivered on as it was promised by the government. And within that, we want to make sure that the reforms do not allow like no fault evictions through the back door. So essentially, landlords able to get possession for not kind of good reason, and just to basically kind of increase the rent and move different tenants in. We want to make sure that these reforms actually like genuinely protect renters, and we want to prevent economic evictions from happening, which is basically a term that's used to describe when landlords can use rent increases to evict tenants to kind of push them out. So we want to make sure there's protections in place to stop this from happening. And also looking at open-ended tenancies, as I'm sure most people are aware, this kind of 6-month, 12-month tenancy is just kind of doesn't allow anyone to kind of put down stable roots. I mean, I myself have lived in 15 different private rented properties over the years, so I'm sure like this kind of needs to change massively, so people have that stability in their lives. And also we want to see that notice periods for eviction are extended from 2 months, because it's not enough time for tenants to find a new home, and also is kind of quite a big leading factor of homelessness, especially in areas of high rents where tenants can find it very difficult basically to find somewhere else to live. And we also want to see the government tackle high rents, particularly this kind of marker of people paying over 30% of their income on rent, which is kind of seen more in kind of bigger cities like London, and it's kind of also again a leading factor of homelessness because people can't afford the rents, and they find it difficult to kind of find housing in certain areas because it's completely unaffordable. So this is kind of what covers our asks of stability and affordability within the sector that we want to see. But if you can go on to the next slide, thanks. Yeah, so what we're looking for in kind of the delivery of safer and more decent homes for tenants is, yeah, we want to see the introduction of a national register of landlords to ensure that rented homes are decent and safe. So at the coalition, we've very much welcomed the announcements from the government like a month ago that they would look into the merits of a national landlord register, because essentially at the moment there's no record of who owns the 4.5 million private rented properties in the UK, and there's no checks on who becomes a landlord. And across the UK and other countries like Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, there is already existing national landlord registers, but we don't have one in the UK. For example, Scotland introduced one in 2006, and there's almost 270,000 landlords registered on this register. So it's something we want to see in the UK basically to really improve standards within the sector, because at local authorities who are responsible for enforcement of landlords when they don't kind of follow regulations or keep the homes to a good standard, it makes it very difficult for this enforcement to happen because there is no register or record of who owns the properties. So we want to see this introduced and make it easier for local authorities to target criminal landlords. And we feel like the register should require evidence that landlords are meeting minimum standards as a condition of the registration, and registration being removed for any landlords that are operating criminally who break the law, and also penalised as well for not signing up for the register. And then also additionally to this, we want to see tougher action on illegal evictions, which is particularly kind of pertinent through the pandemic, which has seen quite a significant rise in illegal evictions, because we feel that tenants need to be protected from criminal landlords and letting agents as well, who cause serious financial and emotional suffering by forcing them out of their homes, which can be often in quite a brutal and horrible way. So we feel like the government should be addressing the shortcomings in the existing legislation that relate to harassment and illegal evictions within private rented housing. And with the reforms coming up as well, it's likely that landlords operating in a more kind of like shadow, kind of criminal kind of area of private rented housing will be using illegal evictions to get through the kind of loopholes of the kind of great protections that will be in place. So we need to see that illegal evictions are properly dealt with. Yeah, if you can go on to the next slide. Yeah, so finally, we want to see an overall like more just and fair housing system. So within this, we want to see an end to DSS discrimination, so discrimination against tenants or renters who are in receipt of welfare benefits, but also this extends to renters who are on low incomes, as they're out of contracts, who see discrimination before even signing a tenancy and often are excluded from signing up and viewed as not being able to kind of maintain a tenancy. And we also want to see an end to right to rent. which has been ruled as discriminatory. And basically, right to rent is, to order to secure a tenancy, you have to prove that you have the correct immigration status, which means that landlords and letting agents have to do like passport checks and visa checks, which is basically an extension of kind of like border control to housing. And this policy actually increases quite a lot of discrimination within private rented housing. And a couple of years ago, it was found through like a landlord survey that the government did that 25% of landlords and also 10% of letting agents were not letting to people that didn't have British passports. So even people that actually had like the legal right to remain in the country were finding themselves being discriminated against. So we want to see an end to this kind of unjust discriminatory practice. And finally, we want to see that there's a guarantee for all renters who need access to legal aid to have this. And improving access to justice is going to be imperative to the reforms that are ahead. It needs to be supported through the changes that are coming in to create a more balanced rental system between tenants and landlords. So any reforms ahead should be combined with better dispute resolution, mediation services to relieve pressure from the courts that are properly kind of supportive of renters, and also improving access to justice should not just be focused solely on digitisation, but accessibility, because often when court proceedings are digitised, it means that rulings are often kind of not for tenants because they don't have a chance to kind of deliver their experiences or the reasons why they've may fallen behind the rent or the kind of issues for the reasons they're facing eviction. And we want to see an expanded legal aid system and higher access to advice and representation for renters. So that covers kind of what we're calling for under the Renters Reform Bill. So these are quite top line asks at the moment, and like we're doing further work of kind of expanding the policy detail around this. So this is what's going to be happening in the lead up to the white paper, is us kind of expanding on kind of these key asks that we came together and published back in April this year, which coincided with the anniversary of the government's pledge to end no-fault evictions. So I think we can go on to the next slide.
Sorry, I'm just trying to move it on. My computer's being slow, bear with me. Cool. So yeah, we thought we'd have an opportunity now to answer some of your questions. Just if there's any questions you want to know about, anything you want to know about the upcoming changes, or any comments you have about what changes in renting you'd most like to see, drop them in the chat. I mean, we can start with some of the ones that have come through already. Dave's asked, would it help for me to write to my local paper or tell you my experience? Dave, if it's okay, we're going to cover how you all can get involved with the coalition just after this. So hold that thought, and we will answer it. So some of the others that have come through is there's an interesting one from Heather's raised the issue of open-ended tenancies and holiday lets. The question is, regarding open-ended tenancies, this had unintended consequences in Scotland of holidaymakers signing tenancies in Edinburgh, cancelling the agreement on day one, staying for a fortnight and only paying 1 month's rent, much cheaper than a fortnight's holiday let. Are there any ideas to prevent this? I mean, there's Fiona. Sorry, 1 second. I thought I saw something else, but ignore me. So Heather there are lots of ways that you could prevent this, and the first is through making sure that holiday lets are included in the road landlord or a national register of landlords, so there's better regulation of holiday lets and you can see who's doing this. I think in terms of tenants cancelling, that would be an unintended consequence, and I think you could get, one of the ways you could get around that is by suggesting that there's a minimum time that tenants would have to stay in the very outset of a tenancy, which we think from our understanding of renters what they need is that the vast majority would like to stay more than a month anyway, so hopefully wouldn't have too many adverse effects on people. But I think the answer to that broadly is making sure that holiday lets are better regulated and better understood, because at the moment there's a real lack of data, and that's something that a national register of landlords could address. I've also seen that Fiona has her hand up, so we can unmute. Yeah, and I'll take a question from Fiona. Hello.
Oh, hi. I did put a question. I did put something in the chat, actually. I didn't mean to raise my hand, but
oh, sorry to be on the spot.
yeah, sorry. My contribution was about letting agents, actually, because I know your campaign calls for a national register of landlords, but I'm actually an enforcement officer, a trading standards enforcement officer, and we do carry out the enforcement to do with letting agents. And I've worked with a lot of private sector housing teams, and letting agents drive an awful lot of bad practice, really. So I think there needs to be an equivalent for, register for letting agents as well as for landlords, really, because it can be quite significant, really, that the bad practice that they drive.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. Absolutely agree with that, Fiona. And I think that there's real scope to sort of define what is included in a register, and whether it should be called a register of landlords, whether it should be a register of landlords and letting agents, and to capture letting agent practices as well. So yeah, we'd agree with that. And it sounds like the attendees agree with you too. I've seen too many landlords pass everything off to estate agents who could be just as bad.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. Is there anyone else who's got their hand up? I can't see. Otherwise, I'll just answer a couple more in the chat before we move on to how basically people can get involved with the coalition. There is one more. So someone has actually asked a really good question on where the current law stands on no DSS, which I will just answer now before we move on. But yeah, so no DSS has been ruled as discriminatory. There was a recent court case brought forward by some strategic lawyers at Shelter who demonstrated that practices advertising no DSS actually has indirect discriminatory impact on people like women and other people with protected characteristics. So it is unlawful to discriminate against no DSS tenants, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. I can see Siobhan has unmuted herself. Did you want to add to that, Siobhan? Or did I miss?
I think I was just unmuted anyway.
Oh, I look like you were about to speak.
I think also, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think also that the government did put forward their kind of model tenancy, which is not mandatory basically, but it outlines that landlords or agents shouldn't operate kind of DSS discriminatory practices when letting to tenants. But again, it's optional. It's not a fixed thing that landlords have to adhere to. So it's not really strong enough, really, to deter landlords from operating these practices.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree. And we know that it's still widespread, and we know that on major listing sites and on sites that just let people post individual adverts, there's still filters to search by DSS. There's still lots of individual landlords who say that, and so yeah, much more needs to be done. I've just seen a question from Katie about pets in the white paper. Katie said, is there going to be anything about pets in the white paper? So many people need pets for their well-being, and they're a big part of the family. Yeah, absolutely agree, and good question, Katie. The government hasn't specifically indicated that there will be, but it's something that Generation Rent are absolutely pushing for the government to make the model tenancy agreement that landlords can use that says that they shouldn't refuse pets, to make that stronger and make it harder for landlords to refuse pets. Yeah, since we've seen lots of people report that landlords are refusing pets now, or even attempting to charge extra rent since the tenant fees ban came into place, and it's something that we want to look at as part of the white paper. Yeah, no, Katie said when I last tried to find a property, it was very stressful as every advert had no pets and no DSS. Yeah, both of those are things that we want to make it harder for landlords to do in the white paper. So I think we're going to move on now, if that's okay with everyone, and just talk a bit about how you all can get involved with the campaign and help us push for these changes in the upcoming months, in the months up to the white paper. So this is going to be a test for Zoom system. I'm going to hand over to Siobhan, who's going to talk about how you can get involved with the coalition as a renter spokesperson. We're going to hopefully play a video that illustrates how you can do this. Cool, bear with me one moment. I don't get it up. While it's loading, yeah, you can help.
Yeah, I can chat while it's loading. Yeah, I think there's some good questions in the chat around how we can make MPs listen to what we need as renters, and how we can convince them and kind of use our experiences to kind of really amplify what people, how people are living in the private rented housing. So kind of one of our key things within the coalition is really kind of trying to amplify people's voices. So we basically established like renter champions who basically kind of like campaign alongside us and also have a platform to share their experiences with MPs. So for example, Gemma, who we're going to watch the video in a minute, she's one of our renter champions. She was very happy to share her story with the Guardian and some of the newspapers to kind of really kind of show what she was experiencing, and she'll kind of go into detail in this video about her own experiences. But I think what's going to be really key with the Renters Reform Bill and kind of applying pressure to the government to kind of deliver actual transformative change is sharing those stories, because when politicians hear what people are experiencing, they can't really turn away from that. It kind of cuts through a lot of the policy detail and politics, because they can't ignore like what someone is their everyday life and kind of what they're living through with as an individual or as a family. So what's going to be really key into this campaign is kind of embedding those stories in and making sure that they're kind of spread out through the media, and also like reaching like politicians. So also we have another renter champion who's been coming along to basically like parliamentary meetings that we're having with MPs to share her experience, and it's always like very well received. And I think like also I'm sure people here, like everyone has very different experiences of living in private rented housing, and often there's like a view of the sector just basically being for like young people who are coming out of university, don't have an option, but essentially the private rented housing is made up of so many different people, because people don't have any other option. They can't afford to live anywhere. They don't have any savings. People who would normally rely on social housing are completely kind of like locked out of that, with extremely long kind of waiting lists for a social home. So it's kind of sharing the range of voices of what people are experiencing is going to be so key, because this has to be reflected in the reforms, because it has to be a housing choice that it's not even a choice. It's like, obviously it's not a choice for a lot of people, but it has to be a form of housing that everyone can kind of live in and thrive in, and not be facing a huge level of discrimination or poor standards or instability. So this is the real importance of kind of like the coalition kind of like working with renters champions and kind of amplifying those voices. But I'll let Gemma do the talking here.
Cool.
I'm still waiting for the government to end no-fault evictions and to deliver the reforms they promised 2 years ago. I work as a pastoral support worker in a school. I have 2 children and my husband is a translator, and in the past 2 years we have been issued 2 Section 21 no-fault eviction notices, which has led to us having to move house 4 times. We are currently partway through our second Section 21 notice, and we are realistically facing homelessness during a global pandemic. Section 21 notices take away the stability and security from families and have a negative impact on mental health and well-being. It has been particularly difficult for my son, who is autistic and finds change incredibly difficult. And it is for these reasons that I am supporting the Renters Reform Coalition and demand that the government deliver on the changes that they promised.
But yeah, as Siobhan said, it's just really important that if you have been affected, you know, firsthand by issues surrounding disrepair or tenancy instability, things like that, that you do kind of, if you're happy to, you do get involved with the campaign. As Siobhan said, politicians find it much more difficult in our experience to dismiss people's first-hand experience than things that I or Siobhan might be able to say to them. So next, I just want to go over some of the ways that you can get involved if sharing your story and being in front of a camera or in front of media isn't for you. I'm just going to share my screen again. And so another way, I've seen that Dave said, you know, can I write to local paper? Like, absolutely, yes. Another way that you can all, that you can all get involved with the coalition is to write to your MP and ask them for a meeting and ask them to support the coalition. You know, as constituents, you are extremely valuable to your local MPs, and they will want to take action on the issues that matter to you. So there's a handy website called writetoThem.com that will let you know who your MP is and what the contact details are if you don't know it already. You know, it's worth checking online, you know, what majority your MP has, like how many renters are in their constituency, because it's these sorts of things that really will make a difference to them, and that will really make them, you know, aware that renters' rights are important, and this is something that's going to be crucial for them if they want to be re-elected. And it's not just the right thing to do, but it's something that they might have a sort of very personal interest in. And so there's lots of different ways that you can write to your MP about the Renters Reform Coalition, but there's some general pointers that we just wanted to share for anyone. I mean, and these are relevant for writing and getting in contact with your representatives on any issue, but MPs get a huge amount of correspondence, and so there's some ways that you can make yours sort of stand out. And I think the first thing that we'd always advise people to do is to make it personal and explain why this issue, why renting matters to you. You know, if there's your own experience, or whether it's an experience of people that you know, or what you just know it's just something that matters to you personally, it's always much better to talk about that than post something that's you know, clearly from a campaign website or something like that. The next thing that's really good to always do when you're contacting your MP is have an ask. Explain what you want your MP to do. Is it that you want them to commit to ending Section 21? Is it that you want them to support the Renters Reform Coalition? You could even ask them, you know, to meet with you and to keep them updated on what they are doing for private renters. But I think, you know, obviously the Renters Reform Coalition, our ask would be for the MP to support the coalition's aims that Siobhan has sent out, and to do their best in Parliament to work across the House to make that happen. And another thing that we'd always direct you to do is to follow up with MPs as well, and to sort of show them that you actually mind about this. They get a huge amount of correspondence, and someone who's persistent, someone who isn't going to just sort of send one email and then hope for the best, is much more likely to get a response. So it takes some persistence, but that's something that we'd be really keen for as many people as possible to do. I've seen that in the chat, Dave said that that could we go to MP surgeries? Like, absolutely, please do include and ask on to your MP to go and to meet with them wherever you can and to talk to them in person about your experience of the renting crisis and why this matters. It's so powerful when they hear it directly from the voices of their constituents rather than from people who they know they're going to hear it from, like me or like Siobhan. And there's so much else you can do as well. There are things like getting involved on social media, and we will share some like more general things that you can do to stay involved with Generation Rent and with the campaign after this. Just wanted to check before we do that, though, if there are any other questions that people have specifically relating to involvement with the coalition in the run-up to the white paper, or we can move on after that.
I think there was some other questions in the chat as well from before.
I'll pass over to you to do one if that's all right.
Yeah, so there's a question about what does the government want to do about deposits, which is something that we're not covering in our policy kind of ask for the Renters Reform Bill, because it wasn't kind of a collective or kind of broad aim for a lot of the organisations, but there are obviously quite a lot of key organisations across the housing sector that are calling for this. But I think Caitlin will know a little bit more about what the government have announced with the deposit passporting proposal that they've put forward. Yeah,
so the government has they've said that they will introduce a lifetime deposit, which means we don't yet know what that means. One of the things the government's been looking at is introducing a passporting system, which would mean that when you move house, instead of getting a having to pay for a new deposit, you just move your old deposit minus any reductions over to the next landlord, which would save massively on upfront costs when moving, and it would also it would mean that people didn't have to dip into savings or go into debt or ask friends and family for money, and it would also put an onus on the landlord to return deposits quickly. But there's a lot more that the government could do on deposits. One of the things Generation Rent is calling for is a much more standardised disputes process, so that there are actually some things built into the system to discourage unscrupulous landlords from making unfair deductions or making repeated deductions. And the English Housing Survey shows that a huge amount of renters get deductions from their deposit, and while some of them will be absolutely reasonable, there's very little to discourage people from just essentially making a claim and seeing whether or not it gets accepted. And there's also quite a lot that the government could do to make it easier for people to move into the private rented sector for the first time and raise the money for a deposit for the first time. So that's something that we will be looking at over the course of the white paper as well.
Thanks, Caitlin. I'll just do a couple of the questions that were related to kind of what's in the bill, and then there are some quite good suggestions of like actions to be involved that we can kind of go through as well. I'll do one more question from this, and I think someone said Fiona has a hand up, so then I'll go over to Fiona.
Fiona's was a historic hand.
Oh, was it? Okay. So Dave has also put in the chat that will there be a policy to help renters deal with repairs? So I think this one kind of straddles a few different parts of what's potentially ahead in the reforms, because the kind of part of the problem with having no stability or security living in private rented homes, and like the fear of eviction means that often tenants can't advocate or complain about repairs for fear of retaliatory eviction. So we hope that basically through the reforms kind of increasing the security that tenants have, so making it much harder for them to be just kind of evicted for no reason means that they will have more power to basically ask their landlords for repair or kind of other issues around safety of the home. So this is kind of really interconnected to that, and there have been kind of government promises in the past for other pieces of legislation or law that is aimed at kind of improving safety and standards. which is basically was through the Homes Fit for Human Habitation Act that came out a couple of years ago. But a lot of this it's quite unsupported because tenants don't have any power to kind of go to the landlord and ask for repairs. So what is going to be really key to uphold that piece of legislation to reform standards is going to be through the Renters Reform Bill, by giving more agency and control basically to tenants. And then also a national landlord register, which we hope to see will also help to kind of improve the ability for tenants to ask for repairs as well. So hopefully that answers that question. Okay, so Fiona it's not a historic hand. If you wanted to ask a question.
Sorry.
Sorry, I didn't have a question. Sorry, that was a hand. I just put something in the chat, which is following on from what Siobhan said about repairs, really. I agree that it's one of the worst areas of complaint for tenants. And I think there needs to be change in legislation to kind of give an automatic right to compensation for tenants. So say if a landlord or letting agent hasn't responded within 14 or 21 days, whatever, then every day after that, you've got an automatic right to get, you know, a day's rent or something, because money like that means that talks really, and I think that's going to have more effect. I mean, it's not going to kind of, the real rogues, it's not going to, you know, probably help with, because they'll just be rogues anyway, but just very poor performance. I think there should be an automatic right to compensation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess you're seeing the brunt of it as working for enforcement for local authority as well, definitely, which is massively under-resourced. And I think we would like to see, as in other countries that use a national landlord register, from the payments that are made by landlords to register, to basically better resource and fund enforcement for local authorities to kind of really tackle like landlords that are operating illegally or not having their housing to a good standard.
Yeah, good idea.
Yeah,
thank you.
So also relevant to this, as Heather's put in the chat, there are so many regulations for landlords to comply with, as well as other 500 licensing schemes. Do you support simplification of this? And also, what's your position on extending the London Rogue landlords and agents checker across the UK? So I think first, do you want to go, Caitlin?
I'll let you speak, and then if there's anything that I want to add, I will do. They're good questions.
Yeah, no, this is a really good question. So I don't know if I'll kind of explain quickly what selective licensing is, but not go into much detail. But in parts of the UK, local authorities, so local councils can apply for a selective licensing scheme, which is a kind of smaller scale registration of landlords to try and improve standards in that area. But there are very strict conditions of, or basically, different kind of factors that a local authority area needs to meet to actually be eligible to apply for selective licensing. So we hope that basically a national landlord register, which would be centralised and also publicly available to tenants, not just local authorities, would kind of, would simplify this process, and it would be mandatory for all landlords to apply for this register. And obviously we'd look into the merits of kind of what was discussed before about letting agents being kind of included in this as well. But yeah, I don't know if you want to come in there, Caitlin.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. And I think would add on the position on extending the London Rogue landlord and agents checker across the UK. We would be, well, I'm speaking on behalf of Generation Rent here, not the whole coalition, but we'd be in favour of doing that through reforming the government's existing rogue landlord database, which currently exists as a record of landlords who've been convicted of offences, but there's only 38 records on it at present, and it's not currently open to the public. It's only for enforcement teams, and so I'd support making that look a bit more like the London one, in that it's publicly available, and making it putting a wider range of offences on the register, making it available to tenants, and also potentially making, you know, an obligation for councils to put landlords on there. Katie saying name and shame the bad ones. Yeah, we totally agree. At the minute, it's a good tool, but its use is really, really limited. We know that there's more than 38 rogue landlords in the country. So yeah, that's how we would go about that.
Yeah, I think what we'll do, there is a few other questions, but I think because we're coming up to time, nearly. I'll just stick with one more question, which is from an anonymous attendee, but saying, do we think the government will stick to its commitment to rental reform? So I think this is kind of links back to the importance of kind of amplifying renters' experiences and trying to cut through a lot of policy, because it seems that although the government have promised to like reform private renting and have promised the Renters Reform Bill and pledged to end, you know, for evictions, it doesn't feel like it's a massive priority for them, and it does keep kind of getting continued, of like kind of like put further and further down the line of when it's going to come forward. So I think that's why it's really important that we kind of raise those voices as much as possible, because that's what's going to pressure the government. Essentially, that change is needed. But yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything there, Caitlin.
Yeah, I'd say that it is. That I think they will stick to it. I think it's how it looks. It's what the rental reform looks like that's really important, and I think that leads us sort of neatly onto what we can do, what we can all do over the next coming months to make sure that the commitment is stuck to, but also that the new system looks as closely like the one we want as possible. So yeah, there's lots of ways that you can stay involved with both the coalition and with Generation Rent. So please, if you're interested in what we're doing in the campaign in general over the coming months, you can sign up at rentersreformcoalition.co.uk. Join the campaign. We'll send that link around, obviously, and that just you'll keep updated on all the activities we have planned. If you've been affected, if you've got first-hand experience of any of the issues that we have been talking about, whether it's moving frequently, DSS, not being able to have not getting repairs done, please do share your story on Rent. We've got a website called Vent Your Rent that encourages people to come forward. Like Siobhan said, these stories are incredibly useful, and we've had people speak to politicians about it, speak to the media about it. You can also join our renters panel, which is where we test out new ideas and policy proposals and find out what renters think about them. We've done this on everything from energy efficiency to rent control, so it's a really broad set of questions that you can get involved with if you're at all interested. You can also become a volunteer, and if you would rather get involved by donating to keep our work going, then we'd be very, very grateful for that as well. But we'd really love for you all to sort of stay in touch and keep up with the campaign. We'll be sending all of this round via a link, and Tilly will be following up with relevant information. And also, there's lots of information on our website from the other sessions of Renters' Rights Awareness Week, which have been much more advice focused. So if you are struggling with getting repairs done, eviction, things like that, there's a wealth of opportunities of resources on our website as well. So please do go and look at those. And I think that's it really. If there are no other questions, then we will round up, and thank you for giving up your lunch break to hear about the coalition, and we hope to see many of you involved in the campaign over the next few months.
Thanks everyone.